Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness create the biggest waves. Today, I'm going to tell you about Marcus Thompson, a 34-year-old construction worker from Cedar Rapids, Iowa, who thought he was just helping a neighbor move some boxes. What he didn't know was that this simple gesture would transform not just his life, but the lives of everyone in his small community, and ultimately touch the hearts of people across the entire nation. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you. Make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Marcus had always been the kind of person who noticed things others overlooked. Growing up in a working-class family in Cedar Rapids, he learned early that community meant everything. His father, Robert Thompson, was a mechanic who never charged full price for fixing the cars of struggling families. His mother, Linda, ran a small food pantry out of their church basement every Saturday morning. They didn't have much, but they shared what they had, and Marcus absorbed those lessons like a sponge. By the time Marcus turned 34, he had built a decent life for himself. He worked for Johnson Construction, a local company that specialized in residential building and renovation. The pay was steady, the work was honest, and Marcus took pride in the fact that he was helping families build their dreams, one house at a time. He lived in a modest 2-bedroom house on Elm Street, a quiet residential area where most of the homes were built in the 1960s and 1970s. The neighborhood was the kind of place where people still waved to each other from their front porches, and where kids could ride their bikes safely down the sidewalks. Marcus's daily routine was simple but fulfilling. He'd wake up at 5:30 a.m., grab a cup of coffee and a quick breakfast, and head to whichever job site Johnson Construction had assigned him that day. He was known among his co-workers for his reliability and his willingness to help others. If someone was struggling with a particularly difficult task, Marcus would be the first to offer assistance. If a new employee needed guidance, Marcus would take them under his wing without being asked. The neighborhood on Elm Street had its own rhythm. Mrs. Patterson, an elderly widow who lived 3 houses down, would tend to her garden every morning. At precisely 7 a.m., the Johnson family across the street had 2 young children who would play in their front yard every afternoon while their mother, Sarah, kept a watchful eye from the porch. Mr. Rodriguez, who lived next door to Marcus, was a retired teacher who spent his evenings reading on his front steps, always ready with a friendly wave and a kind word. It was into this peaceful, predictable world that the Morrison family arrived on a Tuesday morning in late September. Marcus first noticed the moving truck when he was leaving for work. It was one of those large, white rental trucks that seemed to dwarf the modest houses on the street. He could see a man in his 40s directing the movers, his movements careful and deliberate. There was something about the way he carried himself that caught Marcus's attention, a certain bearing that suggested military training. As Marcus drove past the house, he caught a glimpse of the family. The man was tall and lean, with graying hair at his temples and the kind of posture that spoke of years of discipline. His wife was a petite woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile that she offered to the movers even though she looked exhausted. There were 3 children, 2 boys who looked to be in elementary school, and a teenage girl who was helping carry boxes despite the obvious effort it required. Marcus almost stopped to introduce himself that morning, but he was already running late for work. Johnson Construction had a big project starting that day, a complete renovation of a historic home downtown, and Marcus was part of the crew that would be laying the foundation work. He made a mental note to swing by the Morrison house that evening to welcome the new neighbors properly. The Morrison house was a split-level home built in the early 1970s, with a small front yard and a driveway that could accommodate 2 cars. It had been empty for almost 6 months after the previous owners, an elderly couple named the Hendersons, moved to a retirement community in Florida. The house had good bones, as Marcus's father would have said, but it needed some work. The front steps were slightly uneven, the driveway had several cracks, and the paint on the shutters was peeling in places. When Marcus returned home that evening, he could see that the moving truck was still there, though most of the larger items had clearly been moved inside. The family was still working, carrying boxes and smaller items from the truck to the house. Marcus parked his pickup truck in his driveway and walked over to introduce himself. "Excuse me," he called out as he approached the man who was clearly the father of the family. "I'm Marcus Thompson. I live right there." He pointed to his house. "Just wanted to welcome you to the neighborhood." The man turned and extended his hand with a firm grip. "David Morrison," he said. "And this is my wife, Janet, and our kids, Michael, Tommy, and Sarah." He gestured to his family, who had paused in their work to acknowledge the introduction. "Nice to meet you all," Marcus said, immediately struck by the warmth in Janet Morrison's eyes and the polite way the children responded to the introduction. "How's the move going?" David Morrison's expression grew slightly strained. "It's going," he said with a wry smile. "We've got most of the big stuff in, but there are still a lot of boxes to go. The movers had to leave earlier than expected, so we're finishing up on our own." Marcus could see the exhaustion in the family's faces. Moving was hard work under the best of circumstances, but doing it without professional help was particularly challenging. Without hesitation, he rolled up his sleeves. "Well, I've got some time and an extra pair of hands," Marcus said. "Mind if I help out?" The look of surprise that crossed David Morrison's face was quickly replaced by something else, gratitude mixed with a hint of reluctance. Marcus could see the internal struggle playing out in the man's expression. On one hand, they clearly needed help. On the other hand, accepting assistance from a stranger wasn't easy for someone who had spent years being self-sufficient. "I couldn't ask you to do that," David said, though his eyes betrayed how much he wanted to accept the offer. "You just got home from work. You probably want to relax." Marcus shook his head with an easy smile. "I've been sitting in an office trailer most of the day going over blueprints. Trust me, some physical work would be good for me. Besides, that's what neighbors do for each other, right?" Janet Morrison stepped forward, her hands dusty from handling boxes. "Are you sure? We still have about 2 hours of work left, maybe." "More, I'm sure," Marcus said firmly. "Just point me in the right direction." What followed was one of those experiences that seem ordinary on the surface, but carry a deeper significance that only becomes clear in retrospect. Marcus threw himself into the work with the same energy and attention to detail that he brought to his construction job. He helped carry the heavy boxes, rearranged furniture when Janet decided a different layout might work better, and even offered practical suggestions about how to make the most of the storage space in their new home. As they worked, Marcus began to learn more about the Morrison family. David had recently retired from the Marine Corps after 22 years of service. He had been stationed all over the world: California, North Carolina, Japan, Germany, and most recently, Camp Pendleton. In California, Janet had been a military spouse for their entire marriage, moving from base to base, making friends and then saying goodbye, creating homes in temporary housing, and raising their children in a lifestyle that demanded constant adaptation. "This is our first civilian move," Janet explained as they carried a particularly heavy box marked books into the house. "David's been out for about 6 months now. We decided to settle here because Janet's sister lives about an hour away, and we wanted the kids to have some extended family nearby." Marcus nodded, understanding the weight of that decision. Military families often lived far from their relatives, and the transition to civilian life could be challenging. "What's David doing for work now?" he asked. "He's got a position with the county veterans office," Janet said. "He'll be helping other veterans navigate the system, get their benefits, find services they need. It's perfect for him. He's always been good at helping people." As if summoned by the mention of his name, David appeared at the front door, carrying a box that was clearly heavier than it should have been. Marcus immediately moved to help him, and together they maneuvered it into the house. "What's in here?" Marcus asked, slightly out of breath. David smiled for the first time that evening. "My dress blues and some other uniforms. Janet keeps telling me I should donate them, but—" He trailed off with a shrug. "But they're part of who you are," Marcus finished. "I get it. My dad still has his work shirts from the factory where he worked for 30 years. He's been retired for 10 years, but those shirts are still hanging in his closet." David's expression grew more thoughtful. "Exactly. It's not that I want to keep living in the past, but those uniforms represent 22 years of my life. 22 years of serving something bigger than myself." As they continued working, Marcus found himself increasingly impressed by the Morrison family. The children pitched in without complaint, working together with a coordination that spoke of practice and good parenting. When young Tommy, who couldn't have been more than 8 years old, struggled with a box that was too heavy for him, his older brother Michael immediately stepped in to help without being asked. Sarah, the teenage daughter, seemed to have appointed herself as the coordinator of the smaller items, making sure nothing got lost in the shuffle. But it was the way David and Janet worked together that really caught Marcus's attention. They moved with the kind of synchronization that comes from years of partnership, anticipating each other's needs, communicating with glances and small gestures. When Janet looked frustrated about where to put a particular piece of furniture, David would offer a gentle suggestion. When David seemed overwhelmed by the sheer volume of boxes still to be moved, Janet would quietly redirect the children to help him. "You guys are like a well-oiled machine," Marcus observed as they took a brief break to drink some water. Janet laughed, but it was a tired laugh. "We've had a lot of practice. Military life teaches you to be efficient with moves. We've probably moved 12 times in the past 20 years. 12 times? Marcus couldn't hide his amazement. "I've lived in the same house for 8 years, and I can't imagine having to pack up and move." "You get used to it," David said, though there was a note of weariness in his voice. "But this move feels different. This is supposed to be our forever home, the place where we put down roots." As they worked through the evening, Marcus began to understand what David meant. This wasn't just about moving boxes and furniture. This was about a family trying to transition from a life of constant motion to one of stability. It was about children who had never lived in one place for more than a few years, trying to imagine what it would be like to have a hometown. It was about parents who had spent decades serving their country, now trying to figure out how to serve their community. The sun was setting by the time they finished moving the last box. The Morrison family stood in their driveway, looking at their new home with a mixture of exhaustion and satisfaction. Marcus felt a deep sense of satisfaction too, the kind that comes from helping someone in need without expecting anything in return. "I can't thank you enough," David said, extending his hand to Marcus again. "You didn't have to do this." "Yes, I did," Marcus replied, meaning it completely. "That's what neighbors do." But as Marcus walked back to his house that evening, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had just been part of something more significant than a simple moving day. There was something about the Morrison family, their quiet dignity, their obvious love for each other, their respectful gratitude, that had touched him in a way he couldn't quite articulate. He had helped them move their belongings, but he sensed that they had moved something in him as well. Little did Marcus know that this simple act of neighborly kindness would set in motion a chain of events that would transform not just his understanding of community, but the lives of countless people across the country. Sometimes the most profound journeys begin with a single step, and Marcus Thompson had just taken his. Over the next few days, Marcus found himself thinking about the Morrison family more than he had expected. There was something about their story that had touched him. The quiet dignity with which they approached their new civilian life, the way they supported each other through what was clearly a major transition, and the sense that they were carrying burdens that weren't immediately visible, Marcus had grown up in a family that valued military service. His grandfather had served in World War II, and his uncle had done 2 tours in Vietnam. He understood, at least intellectually, the sacrifices that military families made. But spending those few hours with the Morrisons had given him a more personal understanding of what that service really meant. On Thursday evening, Marcus noticed that David was in his front yard, trying to fix the uneven front steps that Marcus had observed when the family first moved in. From his kitchen window, Marcus could see David examining the steps, measuring them, and clearly trying to figure out the best way to approach the repair. Marcus grabbed his toolbox and walked over. "Need a hand?" he called out. David looked up, a mixture of frustration and embarrassment on his face. "I'm not much of a handyman," he admitted. "I can field strip a rifle blindfolded, but home repair isn't exactly my strong suit." Marcus laughed. "Well, home repair is exactly my strong suit. Let me take a look." As Marcus examined the steps, David explained the problem. "The bottom step is about an inch lower than it should be. It's not dangerous, but it's annoying, and Janet almost tripped on it yesterday. I thought I could just shim it up, but I'm not sure what kind of material to use." Marcus nodded, already visualizing the solution. "You're on the right track with the shimming, but you want to use pressure-treated lumber for this. Regular wood will rot out within a few years. I've got some scraps at home that would work perfectly." "I couldn't ask you to," David started. "You're not asking," Marcus interrupted with a grin. "I'm offering. Give me 10 minutes to grab my materials." As Marcus worked on the steps, with David assisting by holding materials and passing tools, they began to talk more deeply about David's military service. Marcus learned that David had served in Afghanistan and Iraq, that he had been responsible for training young Marines, and that he had been awarded several commendations for his service. "What made you decide to retire?" Marcus asked as he adjusted the new shim. David was quiet for a moment. "A lot of things," he said finally. "The kids are getting older, and they need stability. Janet has been incredibly supportive, but 22 years of military life is hard on a family. And honestly, I was starting to feel burned out." "Burned out how?" David helped Marcus position the step properly. "It's hard to explain to someone who hasn't been there. The deployments, the constant training, the responsibility for other people's lives. I loved serving, don't get me wrong. But there comes a point where you realize you've given everything you have to give, and it's time to find a different way to serve." Marcus could hear the weight of experience in David's voice. "That's why you took the job with the Veterans Office?" "Exactly. I still want to serve, but I want to serve in a way that lets me come home to my family every night." David paused. "The hardest part is that I sometimes feel like I'm abandoning the Marines who are still serving. Like I'm taking the easy way out." Marcus stopped what he was doing and looked at David directly. "You served for 22 years. You've earned the right to come home. Intellectually, I know that. Emotionally, it's more complicated." As Marcus finished the repair, he found himself thinking about the complexity of military service and the challenges of transitioning to civilian life. He had never really considered how difficult it might be for someone who had spent decades in the military to adjust to civilian life, or how much guilt might be involved in making that transition. "There," Marcus said, testing the stability of the repaired step. "That should be solid for years." David tested the step himself, nodding with satisfaction. "Perfect. What do I owe you?" "Nothing," Marcus said firmly. "But I've got a question for you. What's the hardest part about adjusting to civilian life?" David considered the question seriously. "The pace, I think. In the military, everything has a purpose, a timeline, a clear objective. Civilian life is more ambiguous, and the sense of mission is different. In the military, you know exactly what you're supposed to be doing and why. In civilian life, you have to create your own sense of purpose." "And have you created your own sense of purpose?" "I'm working on it," David said. "The job with the Veterans Office helps. But it's an adjustment." As they cleaned up the tools, Marcus learned more about the Morrison family's situation. David's retirement pay and his new job with the county provided a decent living, but it was a significant step down from their previous income. Janet was looking for work, but with her background as a military spouse, she faced the challenge of having a resume with significant gaps due to the demands of military life. "She's incredibly capable," David said with obvious pride. "She's managed our household through multiple deployments, organized events for the family readiness group, volunteered for every possible cause. But none of that translates easily to civilian job qualifications." Marcus nodded, beginning to understand the full scope of the challenges the Morrison family faced. It wasn't just about moving to a new place. It was about rebuilding their entire life structure. "The kids are adjusting better than we expected," David continued. "Sarah's a junior in high school, so this move was particularly hard on her. But she's already made a few friends. Michael and Tommy are younger, so they're adapting more quickly. What about you?" Marcus asked. "How are you adjusting?" David smiled, but it was a complex expression. "Some days are better than others. I miss the camaraderie. I miss having a clear mission. But I'm learning to appreciate other things, like having time to fix my own front steps, even if I'm not very good at it." "You're learning," Marcus said. "That's what matters." As David prepared to head inside, he turned back to Marcus. "You know, I've been thinking about what you said the other night. About neighbors helping neighbors. What about it? I've lived in a lot of places, but I've never experienced anything quite like this neighborhood. The way people just naturally look out for each other. It's special." Marcus felt a warm sense of pride. "It's just how things should be. Maybe, but it's not how things always are." David paused. "I want you to know that what you've done, for my family helping us move, fixing our steps, just being a good neighbor, it means more than you probably realize." "David, you don't need to." "Yes, I do. You've helped us feel at home here. You've made us feel like we belong. After 22 years of temporary housing and constant moves, that's not something I take lightly." As Marcus watched David walk back to his house, he found himself thinking about the power of simple human connection. He had helped a neighbor with some boxes and fixed a step. But somehow, those small gestures had created something larger, a sense of community, a feeling of belonging, a foundation for friendship. What Marcus didn't know was that this foundation would soon support something much larger than either of them could have imagined. Word travels fast in small communities, especially when it involves acts of kindness. By Friday morning, several of Marcus's neighbors had heard about his help with the Morrison family's move and his repair of their front steps. What started as casual conversation over backyard fences and at the local coffee shop began to evolve into something more organized. Mrs. Patterson, the elderly widow who tended her garden every morning, was the first to approach Marcus about the Morrisons. She knocked on his door Friday evening, carrying a covered casserole dish and wearing the determined expression of someone on a mission. "Marcus," she said without preamble, "I heard about what you did for the new family. That was very kind of you." "It was nothing special, Mrs. Patterson, just being neighborly." "Well, I think it was special," she said firmly. "And I think we should do more. I made an extra lasagna today, and I was hoping you might introduce me to them so I can drop it off." Marcus smiled, recognizing the wisdom behind Mrs. Patterson's request. She understood that approaching the Morrison family directly might make them feel uncomfortable, but having Marcus make the introduction would make the gesture feel more natural. "I'd be happy to introduce you," Marcus said. "Let me grab my jacket." As they walked across the street to the Morrison house, Mrs. Patterson explained her thinking. "Military families give so much for all of us," she said. "The least we can do is help them feel welcome in their new community." When Janet Morrison answered the door, Marcus could see the surprise in her eyes at finding two neighbors on her doorstep. But Mrs. Patterson's warm smile and the enticing smell of the lasagna quickly put her at ease. "Mrs. Morrison," Marcus said, "I'd like you to meet Mrs. Patterson. She lives just down the street, and she wanted to welcome you to the neighborhood." "Please call me Janet," Janet said, immediately inviting them in. "And Mrs. Patterson, that smells wonderful." "It's just a simple lasagna," Mrs. Patterson said, though Marcus knew from experience that her simple lasagna was anything but simple. "I always make too much food, and I thought your family might enjoy it while you're still getting settled." As they chatted in the Morrisons' living room, Marcus noticed that the family had made remarkable progress in making the house feel like a home. The boxes were mostly unpacked, the furniture was arranged thoughtfully, and Janet had somehow managed to create a warm, welcoming atmosphere despite having been in the house for less than a week. David appeared from the kitchen, and Marcus made the introductions. Mrs. Patterson immediately began asking about the family's needs. Did they know where the best grocery store was? Had they found a good pediatrician for the boys? Did they need recommendations for local services? "You're very kind," David said, and Marcus could hear the genuine appreciation in his voice. "We're still figuring out where everything is." "Well, you just let me know if you need anything," Mrs. Patterson said. "I've lived in this neighborhood for 37 years, and I know where to find everything." As they prepared to leave, Janet walked them to the door. "Thank you so much," she said to Mrs. Patterson. "And Marcus, I can't tell you how much your help has meant to us. David and I were just talking about how lucky we are to have landed in such a nice neighborhood." "We're the lucky ones," Marcus replied, and he meant it. The next morning, Marcus was working in his garage when Mr. Rodriguez, his next-door neighbor, appeared with a cup of coffee and a thoughtful expression. "Marcus," he said, "I heard about the new family, military, right?" "That's right. David Morrison. He just retired from the Marines after 22 years. Mr. Rodriguez nodded slowly. "I taught high school for 35 years. I had a lot of military kids in my class as kids, whose parents were stationed at various bases around the country. Military families face unique challenges." Marcus paused in his work. "What do you mean?" "Well, the kids especially. They're used to moving frequently, so they often struggle with the idea of putting down roots. They're used to military communities, where everyone understands the lifestyle, the deployments, the challenges. Civilian communities don't always understand what these families have been through." "What are you suggesting?" Mr. Rodriguez smiled. "I'm suggesting that we make sure the Morrison family knows they're not just welcome here, they're valued. I'm suggesting that we show them what a real community looks like." Over the weekend, Marcus began to see what Mr. Rodriguez meant. The Johnson family from across the street stopped by the Morrison house with their two young children, offering to include Michael and Tommy in their regular Saturday morning bike rides around the neighborhood. Mrs. Chun from 2 houses down brought over some of her famous chocolate chip cookies and offered to help Janet navigate the local school system. But it was on Sunday evening that Marcus truly understood the impact of what was happening. He was sitting on his front porch, enjoying the cooler evening air, when he saw David Morrison walking slowly down the street. David's posture was different from what Marcus had observed before, more relaxed, less guarded. "Evening, David," Marcus called out. David changed direction and walked over to Marcus's porch. "Marcus, I wanted to thank you." "For what?" "For starting something. Janet and I have been talking, and we can't believe how welcoming this neighborhood has been. In 22 years of military life, we've lived in a lot of places, but we've never felt so immediately accepted." Marcus gestured to the empty chair beside him. "Have a seat. Tell me more." David sat down with a sigh of contentment. "It's hard to explain. In military communities, there's an automatic understanding. Everyone knows what you're going through because they're going through it too. but civilian communities. Well, sometimes military families feel like outsiders. And you don't feel that way here? Not at all. Mrs. Patterson spent an hour yesterday telling Janet about all the local resources for military families. Mr. Rodriguez offered to help Sarah with her college applications. Apparently, he knows all about the unique challenges military kids face when applying to schools. The Johnson kids have already adopted Michael and Tommy as their new best friends. Marcus smiled. That's just how this neighborhood works. We look out for each other. It's more than that, David said seriously. It's like everyone understands that military service is something to be honored, not just tolerated. As they sat in comfortable silence, watching the neighborhood settle into its evening routine, Marcus felt a deep sense of satisfaction. What had started as a simple gesture of helping a neighbor had somehow catalyzed a broader community response. The Morrison family wasn't just being welcomed. They were being embraced. Marcus, David said after a while, I've been thinking about what you said about neighbors helping neighbors. I've been thinking about how I can contribute to this community. What do you mean? I mean, I've been on the receiving end of a lot of kindness lately. I'd like to find ways to give back. Marcus nodded. What are you thinking? Well, I've got 22 years of leadership experience. I've managed teams, organized logistics, solved problems under pressure. Maybe there are ways I can use those skills to help other people in the neighborhood. I'm sure there are. David stood up, looking more energetic than Marcus had seen him since the family moved in. I think I'm starting to understand what you meant about community. It's not just about people helping each other when there's a crisis. It's about people looking out for each other all the time. That's exactly right. And it's not just about what you can get from a community. It's about what you can contribute to it. As David walked back to his house, Marcus reflected on the transformation he had witnessed. The Morrison family had gone from being newcomers trying to find their place to being valued members of the community. But more than that, they had inspired the entire neighborhood to be more intentional about the way they cared for each other. What Marcus didn't know was that this was just the beginning. The seeds of community that had been planted were about to grow into something much larger than anyone could have imagined. The conversation with David Morrison stayed with Marcus for the rest of the week. He found himself thinking about the complexity of military service, the weight of leadership responsibilities, and the challenges of transitioning to civilian life. But more than that, he found himself thinking about how his small community might be able to support the Morrison family in ways that went beyond casseroles and casual conversation. Marcus had always been a practical person, someone who believed in solving problems through action rather than just talking about them. So when he had an idea on Thursday evening, he decided to act on it immediately. He started by calling Mrs. Patterson, knowing that she had lived in the neighborhood longer than anyone else and had connections throughout the community. Mrs. Patterson, it's Marcus. I wanted to talk to you about the Morrison family. Oh, Marcus, I'm so glad you called. I've been thinking about them too. That poor family has been through so much. What do you mean? Well, I've been talking to Janet a bit more, and I'm learning about some of the challenges they're facing. Did you know that David is dealing with some significant health issues related to his military service? Nothing life-threatening, but chronic pain from some injuries he sustained overseas. And Janet is having trouble finding work because her resume doesn't reflect all the skills she developed as a military spouse. Marcus felt a surge of determination. Mrs. Patterson, what would you think about organizing something for the Morrison family? Something to show them how much the community appreciates their service. What did you have in mind? I'm not sure yet. But I think we could do something meaningful. Something that would really make a difference for them. Mrs. Patterson was quiet for a moment, then her voice became animated. Marcus, that's a wonderful idea. What if we organized a community appreciation event? Something to honor David's service and show the family how much we value them. That's exactly what I was thinking. But I want to make sure we do it right. This can't be just a symbolic gesture. It needs to be something that actually helps them. What do you mean? Marcus had been thinking about this. Well, from what I've observed, they could use some practical help. The house needs some repairs that David isn't equipped to handle. Janet needs connections to help her find work. The kids could probably use some support as they adjust to a new school system. So you're thinking about combining appreciation with practical assistance. Exactly. What if we organized a community work day? Get some of the neighbors together, make some repairs to their house, help them with whatever they need. Mrs. Patterson's enthusiasm was evident in her voice. Marcus, that's brilliant. I know several people who would be interested in helping. Mr. Rodriguez has been talking about wanting to do something for the family. The Johnsons mentioned that they'd like to help. And I'm sure others would want to participate too. The key is to make sure we do this right, Marcus said. We can't just show up and overwhelm them. We need to find out what they actually need and make sure they're comfortable with the help. How do we do that? Let me talk to David. I think he and I have developed enough of a relationship that he'll be honest with me about what would be most helpful. The next evening, Marcus found David in his garage, working on organizing tools and equipment. It was clear that David was trying to set up a workspace, but he was struggling with the layout. Need some help? Marcus asked. David looked up with a grateful smile. I'm trying to figure out how to organize this space, but I'm not sure what I'm doing. I've never had a garage workshop before. Military housing didn't come with workshops. Not usually. And when you're deployed 6 months at a time, you don't accumulate a lot of tools and equipment. Marcus looked around the garage, immediately seeing several ways to improve the organization. Mind if I make some suggestions? Please. I'm completely out of my depth here. As they worked together to reorganize the garage, Marcus carefully brought up his idea. David, I've been thinking about something, and I wanted to run it by you. What's that? The neighborhood has been talking about your family, about your service, about how grateful we are that you've chosen to make your home here. We'd like to do something to show our appreciation. David paused in his work, his expression becoming cautious. What kind of something? Marcus chose his words carefully. Well, we were thinking about organizing a community workday. Getting some of the neighbors together to help with some of the projects around your house that might be challenging to handle on your own. Marcus, I appreciate the thought, but I don't want to be anyone's charity case. It's not charity, Marcus said firmly. It's community. You've served our country for 22 years. You've made sacrifices that most of us can't even imagine. This is just neighbors helping neighbors. David was quiet for a moment, considering. What kind of projects? That depends on what you need. I've noticed that the driveway has some significant cracks that should be sealed before winter. The gutters need cleaning and probably some repair. The back deck could use some maintenance. And I'm guessing there are some interior projects that Janet might want help with. You've been observing our house pretty closely, David said with a slight smile. Occupational hazard. I work in construction, so I notice these things automatically. David set down the tool he was holding and looked at Marcus directly. Can I ask you something? Why are you doing this? I mean, really why? Marcus had been expecting this question, and he had thought carefully about his answer. Because I've learned something about your family in the past couple of weeks. You've spent 22 years serving something bigger than yourselves. You've made sacrifices that most people don't understand. And now you're trying to build a new life in a civilian community. He paused, organizing his thoughts. I grew up in a family that believed in service. My grandfather served in World War II, my uncle in Vietnam. I never served in the military, but I've always respected those who did. When I see a military family trying to establish themselves in my community, I want to make sure they know they're valued. David's expression softened. It's not that I don't appreciate the offer. It's just that military families learn to be self-sufficient. Asking for help doesn't come naturally. I understand that. But part of transitioning to civilian life is learning to accept community support. That's how civilian communities work. We help each other. David was quiet for a long moment, then nodded slowly. What would this workday look like? That depends on what you and Janet are comfortable with. We could start small, maybe just a few neighbors helping with 1 or 2 projects. Or we could organize something bigger if you're open to it. Let me talk to Janet about it. She's been feeling a bit overwhelmed by all the work the house needs. And she's been worried about the cost of hiring professionals for everything. That's exactly why we want to help. A lot of the work that needs to be done is stuff that can be handled by motivated volunteers with some basic skills. David smiled. Okay, let me talk to Janet, and we'll figure out what would be most helpful. As they finished organizing the garage, Marcus felt a sense of satisfaction. The conversation had gone better than he had hoped. David was open to the idea of community support, and Marcus could see that the family really could benefit from some practical assistance. David, can I ask you one more thing? Sure. What's been the hardest part of adjusting to civilian life? David considered the question. The sense of mission. In the military, you always know exactly what you're supposed to be doing and why. Every day has a clear purpose. In civilian life, you have to create your own sense of purpose, and that's harder than I expected. And have you found it? Your sense of purpose? I'm working on it. The job with the Veterans Office helps, but it's still an adjustment. Marcus nodded, understanding. Well, maybe accepting help from your neighbors can be part of that adjustment. Maybe learning to be part of a civilian community is part of your new mission. David looked at Marcus with new understanding. You know what? I think you might be right. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. By Saturday morning, word of the community workday for the Morrison family had spread throughout the neighborhood and beyond. Marcus was amazed by the response. What had started as a simple idea to help new neighbors had evolved into something much larger, a community-wide effort to honor military service and support a veteran family. Marcus was drinking his morning coffee when his phone rang. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize. Hello? Is this Marcus Thompson? The one organizing the workday for the Morrison family? Yes, this is Marcus. Who's this? My name is Bill Patterson, no relation to your neighbor, Mrs. Patterson. I'm a retired Navy veteran, and I heard about what you're doing for the Morrison family. I'd like to help. Marcus was surprised. How did you hear about it? Through the VFW. Word is getting around the veteran community about what this neighborhood is doing for David Morrison. A lot of us would like to participate. That's incredible. What kind of help are you thinking about? Well, I'm a retired plumber, and I understand the Morrison house might need some plumbing work. I'd be happy to donate my time and expertise. Marcus felt a surge of excitement. Bill, that would be amazing. Let me get your contact information, and I'll make sure you're included in the planning. After he hung up, Marcus immediately called Mrs. Patterson to share the news. Mrs. Patterson, you're not going to believe this. I just got a call from a Navy veteran who wants to help with the Morrison workday. He heard about it through the VFW. Marcus, that's wonderful, but I have to tell you, you're not the only one getting calls. I've had 3 people contact me this morning, all wanting to help. Really? Who? Well, there's a woman named Sarah Johnson, different Sarah Johnson from our neighbors, who runs a landscaping business. She heard about the project and offered to donate materials and labor for any landscaping work the Morrisons might need. Then there's a man named Mike Rodriguez, again, no relation to our neighbor, who owns a small construction company. He offered to help with any major repairs. Marcus was amazed. How are all these people hearing about this? Word travels fast in small communities, especially when it involves helping veterans. And Marcus, there's something else. I got a call from David Morrison about an hour ago. What did he say? He and Janet have talked, and they're overwhelmed by the community response. They want to meet with you to discuss what would be most helpful. Marcus felt a mixture of excitement and responsibility. What had started as a simple gesture of neighborly kindness was turning into a significant community event. He needed to make sure it was handled properly. Mrs. Patterson, I think we need to get organized. This is getting bigger than I expected. I agree. What do you suggest? Let me talk to David and Janet this afternoon to get a clear picture of what they need. Then I think we should organize a planning meeting with all the volunteers. We need to make sure we coordinate properly so we don't overwhelm the Morrison family. That's a good idea. Should we meet at my house? Actually, let me ask David if we can meet at their house. I think it would be good for them to be involved in the planning process. That afternoon, Marcus walked over to the Morrison house where he found David and Janet sitting on their front porch, looking slightly overwhelmed but grateful. Marcus, Janet said as he approached, we can't believe the response we've been getting. David told me about your conversation yesterday, and now we're hearing that people from all over town want to help. Are you okay with that? Marcus asked, settling into a chair beside them. We're honored, David said. But we're also a bit nervous. We don't want to be a burden on anyone. You're not a burden, Marcus said firmly. You're giving the community an opportunity to show appreciation for military service. That's a gift, Janet smiled. We've been making a list of projects that we could use help with. Some are small, some are bigger. We figured we'd let you decide what's realistic. She handed Marcus a piece of paper with a neatly written list. As Marcus read through it, he was impressed by how thoughtfully they had approached the task. The list included driveway crack sealing and minor repair gutter, cleaning and repair back deck maintenance, and staining interior painting in the living room and kitchen, electrical work in the basement, plumbing repair in the master bathroom, landscaping in the front yard, organization of the garage, workshop, minor carpentry repairs throughout the house. This is perfect, Marcus said. And from what I've been hearing, we have volunteers who can handle all of these projects. Really? Janet looked amazed. Really, we have a retired electrician, a retired plumber, people with landscaping experience, and plenty of general volunteers for painting and cleaning. David shook his head in wonder. In 22 years of military service, I've seen a lot of communities, but I've never seen anything like this. What do you mean? I mean, military communities are great at taking care of their own, but civilian communities, sometimes they don't know how to relate to military families. This is different. Janet nodded in agreement. We've been in civilian communities before, during David's leave periods, and sometimes we felt like outsiders. People would thank David for his service, but it often felt perfunctory. This feels genuine. Marcus was moved by their observation. I think this community has been looking for a way to show meaningful appreciation for military service. Your family has given us that opportunity, so what happens next? David asked. Next, we organize properly. I'd like to suggest a planning meeting here at your house, if you're comfortable with that. We'll invite all the volunteers, figure out the logistics, and make sure everything goes smoothly. When would this meeting be? Janet asked. How about tomorrow evening? Sunday evening, maybe 7 o'clock? David and Janet looked at each other, then nodded. That works for us. Perfect. I'll contact all the volunteers and let them know. And David, Janet, I want you to know that you have veto power over any aspect of this project. If anything makes you uncomfortable, just say so. Thank you, Marcus. That means a lot. As Marcus prepared to leave, Janet called out to him. Marcus, can I ask you something? Of course. Why is this so important to you? I mean, we're grateful, but I'm curious about your motivation. Marcus considered the question. I guess it's because I've learned that military families give up a lot in service to our country. You've moved constantly, dealt with deployments, lived with uncertainty and danger. The least we can do is make sure you feel valued when you come home. David stood up and extended his hand. Marcus, I want you to know that this isn't just about the work projects. This is about feeling like we belong somewhere. For the first time in 22 years, we feel like we're not just passing through. As Marcus walked home, he reflected on how much had changed since that first evening when he helped the Morrison family with their boxes. What had started as a simple act of neighborly kindness had grown into something that was bringing together not just a neighborhood, but an entire community of people who wanted to honor military service and support veteran families. The planning meeting the next evening would be crucial. Marcus needed to make sure that all the enthusiasm and goodwill was channeled effectively, that the Morrison family remained comfortable with the scope of the project, and that the work was coordinated properly. But more than that, he was beginning to understand that this project had the potential to be about more than just helping one family. It could be a model for how civilian communities could support military families, a way to bridge the gap between military and civilian life, and a demonstration of the power of community action. The responsibility was daunting, but Marcus felt ready for it. After all, he was just doing what neighbors do for each other, and sometimes that's enough to change the world. Sunday evening arrived with an unexpected chill in the air, a reminder that autumn was settling in across Iowa. Marcus arrived at the Morrison house at 6:45 p.m., carrying a notebook and a sense of nervous anticipation. He had organized work crews before, but never anything like this. This wasn't just about getting a job done. It was about making sure a military family felt welcomed and valued by their new community. David and Kalti, Janet had clearly prepared for the meeting. Their living room was arranged with additional chairs borrowed from neighbors, and Janet had prepared coffee and homemade cookies. The house felt warm and welcoming, a stark contrast to the somewhat sterile feeling it had when the family first moved in. "Are you ready for this?" Marcus asked David as they arranged the last of the chairs. "I think so. To be honest, I'm a little nervous. I'm not used to being the center of attention for positive reasons." "What do you mean?" David smiled ruefully. "In the military, when you're the center of attention, it's usually because something went wrong. This is different." At exactly 7 o'clock, the first volunteers began arriving. Mrs. Patterson was first, followed closely by Mr. Rodriguez and the Johnson family. Over the next 15 minutes, Marcus watched in amazement as the Morrison living room filled with people, some he recognized from the neighborhood, others who were clearly from the broader community. Bill Patterson, the retired Navy veteran and plumber, arrived with a woman Marcus didn't recognize. "Marcus, this is my wife Linda. She's a retired teacher and wanted to meet the Morrison family." Tom Bradley, the retired electrician, came with his wife Sarah, who immediately began admiring Janet's decorating choices. Mike Rodriguez, the construction company owner, brought his teenage son, explaining that he wanted the boy to learn about community service. By 7:20 p.m., there were nearly 20 people in the Morrison living room. Marcus looked around the room and felt a surge of pride in his community, mixed with a sense of responsibility to make sure this project succeeded. "Well," Marcus said, raising his voice slightly to get everyone's attention, "I guess we should get started. First, I want to thank everyone for coming. What we're planning to do here is something special." He gestured to David and Janet. "I'd like everyone to meet David and Janet Morrison and their children Sarah, Michael, and Tommy." David just retired from the Marine Corps after 22 years of service, and the family has chosen to make Cedar Rapids their home. There was a spontaneous round of applause, and Marcus could see David's surprise at the warm reception. "Now," Marcus continued, The purpose of this meeting is to coordinate a community workday to help the Morrison family with some projects around their house. But before we get into logistics, I want to make sure we're all on the same page about what we're doing and why. He paused, looking around the room. This isn't charity. This is community. The Morrison family has served our country for more than 2 decades. They've made sacrifices that most of us can't imagine. This is our way of saying thank you and welcome home. Mrs. Patterson raised her hand. Marcus, I think I speak for everyone when I say that we're honored to be part of this. There were murmurs of agreement from around the room. Good, Marcus said. Now David and Janet have prepared a list of projects that could use some help. David, would you like to share that with everyone? David stood up, looking slightly uncomfortable with the attention, but clearly determined to participate fully. First, Janet and I want to thank all of you for being here. We're overwhelmed by the response. He pulled out the list they had prepared. We've tried to organize this by the type of work involved. Some projects are small and can be handled by general volunteers. Others require specific skills. David began reading through the list, explaining each item. As he spoke, Marcus watched the volunteers' faces. He could see people mentally assigning themselves to different tasks, calculating what tools and materials would be needed. When David finished, Tom Bradley, the retired electrician, raised his hand. David, you mentioned electrical work in the basement. What specifically needs to be done? The previous owners had started to finish the basement, but they never completed the electrical work. There are outlets that aren't properly wired, and the lighting is inadequate. Tom nodded. That's definitely something I can handle. I'll need to take a look at what's there and figure out what materials we'll need. Bill Patterson, the retired plumber, spoke up next. What about the plumbing issues in the master bathroom? Janet answered this time. The shower has very low water pressure, and the toilet occasionally runs. Nothing major, but annoying. Easy fixes, Bill said with a smile. I can take care of that. Mike Rodriguez, the construction company owner, addressed the bigger projects. The driveway work and deck maintenance are more substantial projects. I can donate materials and coordinate the work, but we'll need several volunteers for the labor. Marcus was impressed by how naturally the volunteers were organizing themselves. What about timeline? When should we plan to do this work? Mrs. Patterson had clearly been thinking about this. What if we planned for 2 weekends? One weekend for the smaller projects and another weekend for the bigger ones. That makes sense, Marcus agreed. It would also give us time to get all the materials together. Sarah Johnson, the landscaping business owner, raised her hand. I'd like to donate the materials for the landscaping work. I can also bring a crew to help with the labor. Marcus felt a surge of gratitude. Sarah, that's incredibly generous. It's my pleasure. Military families deserve our support. As the meeting continued, Marcus watched David and Janet's expressions change from nervous anticipation to genuine amazement. They were seeing their new community come together in support of their family in a way that clearly exceeded their expectations. I have a question, Janet said during a pause in the discussion. What can we do to help? I mean, this is a lot of work for all of you. How can our family contribute? Linda Patterson, Bill's wife, smiled. You can provide the coffee and moral support, and maybe share some stories about your travels. I'd love to hear about some of the places you've lived. David laughed. We can definitely do that. We've got stories. As the meeting wound down, Marcus felt a sense of satisfaction. The logistics were falling into place. The volunteers were enthusiastic, and the Morrison family was clearly comfortable with the plan. So, Marcus said, are we all agreed? 2 weekends, the first one in 2 weeks for smaller projects, the second one the following weekend for bigger projects? There were nods and murmurs of agreement around the room. Perfect. I'll coordinate with everyone about specific times and material needs. As people began to leave, Marcus noticed that many of the volunteers took time to speak personally with David and Janet, introducing themselves properly and expressing their appreciation for the family service. The last to leave was Tom Bradley, the retired electrician. He lingered to speak with David about the basement electrical work. "David, I'd like to come by sometime this week to assess what needs to be done. Would that work for you?" "That would be great. I'm usually home after 5 p.m. "Perfect. And David?" "Thank you for your service. My son served in Iraq, so I know something about what military families go through." After everyone had left, Marcus helped David and Janet clean up the living room. "So," Marcus said, "how do you feel about all of this?" David and Janet looked at each other. Then David spoke. "Honestly, it's overwhelming, but in the best possible way." "What do you mean?" Janet answered. "We've never experienced anything like this. Military communities are great at taking care of their own, but this is different. This is a civilian community choosing to embrace a military family. And it's not just about the work," David added. "It's about feeling like we belong somewhere." Marcus smiled, understanding exactly what they meant. "Well, you do belong here. And after these work days, this house is going to feel like it's been your home for years." "I think you're right," David said. "And Marcus, thank you. Not just for organizing this, but for making us feel like we're part of something special." As Marcus walked home that evening, he reflected on what he had witnessed. A community had come together of a shared desire to support a military family, and in the process, they had created something beautiful, a demonstration of what America could be at its best. The first weekend of the Morrison Family Work Project dawned clear and crisp, with the kind of autumn weather that made outdoor work pleasant. Marcus arrived at the Morrison house at 7:30 a.m., carrying his toolbox and a thermos of coffee, to find that he wasn't the first volunteer to arrive. Mrs. Patterson was already there, setting up a folding table on the front lawn and arranging what looked like enough food to feed a small army. Tom Bradley, the retired electrician, was unloading equipment from his truck, while Bill Patterson, the retired plumber, was examining the exterior water connections. "Good morning, everyone," Marcus called out, feeling a surge of pride in his community. "Looks like we're ready to get started." David Morrison emerged from the house, looking slightly overwhelmed but clearly pleased. "Marcus, I can't believe how early everyone is here. And Mrs. Patterson, you didn't have to bring all that food." "Nonsense," Mrs. Patterson replied with a wave of her hand. "You can't expect people to work all day without proper nourishment. Besides, I enjoy cooking for a crowd." Over the next hour, more volunteers arrived. The Johnson family came with their 2 children, who immediately began playing with Michael and Tommy Morrison. Mr. Rodriguez arrived with a stack of books and educational materials, ready to help Sarah Morrison with her college application process. Several neighbors Marcus didn't know well introduced themselves and asked where they could be most helpful. By 9 a.m., the Morrison property was bustling with activity. Marcus had organized the volunteers into teams based on their skills and the projects that needed to be completed. The smaller projects were perfect for this first weekend, tasks that could be completed in a day but would make a significant difference in the family's daily life. Tom Bradley had recruited 2 other volunteers to help with the basement electrical work. Marcus could hear them discussing the project as they headed downstairs, their voices mixing technical expertise with the kind of good-natured commentary that made work enjoyable. The previous owners started this project but never finished it properly, Tom was explaining to his helpers. "We're going to do it right. David and his family deserve to have a safe, functional basement." Bill Patterson had similarly organized his plumbing repair work. He had enlisted Mike Rodriguez's teenage son to help him, turning the repairs into an educational opportunity. "This is a great chance for you to learn some basic plumbing skills," Bill told the boy. "Every homeowner should know how to handle simple repairs." In the backyard, A team of volunteers was working on the deck maintenance. The deck had good bones but needed cleaning, some board replacement, and a fresh coat of stain. Marcus was impressed by how efficiently the volunteers worked together, many of them meeting for the first time but collaborating as if they had been working together for years. "Hand me that sandpaper," called out one volunteer. "This board needs to be replaced," observed another. "No problem, I brought extra lumber," replied a third. Meanwhile, inside the house, a team led by Mrs. Patterson was working on the interior painting project. Janet Morrison had chosen warm, welcoming colors for the living room and kitchen, and the volunteers were making quick work of the preparation and painting. "Janet, these colors are perfect," Mrs. Patterson commented as she applied painter's tape to the trim. "This is going to transform these rooms." "I've been wanting to paint since we moved in," Janet replied, wielding a brush with practiced ease. "But between unpacking and getting the kids settled, I haven't had time." "Well, now you don't have to worry about it," said another volunteer. "We'll have this done by the end of the day." Marcus found himself moving between the different work areas, checking on progress, helping where needed, and coordinating the overall effort. But what struck him most was the atmosphere of the day. This wasn't just about getting work done. It was about community building, about people getting to know each other, about the Morrison family being welcomed into the neighborhood in a meaningful way. Around noon, Mrs. Patterson announced that lunch was ready. The volunteers gathered around the food table, sharing stories and getting to know each other better. Marcus was particularly pleased to see David Morrison relaxing and engaging with the other volunteers. "David," said Tom Bradley, "I heard you're working with the county veterans office now. That must be rewarding work." "It is," David replied. "I'm helping other veterans navigate the system, get their benefits, connect with services they need. It's a way to continue serving, just in a different capacity." "That's important work," commented Bill Patterson. "A lot of veterans struggle with the transition to civilian life." "That's exactly why I wanted to do it," David said. "I understand what they're going through because I've been through it myself." Marcus listened to this conversation with interest. He was learning more about David's adjustment to civilian life and gaining a better understanding of the challenges that veterans face. "David, can I ask you something?" Marcus said during a pause in the conversation. "What's been the most helpful thing about settling in this neighborhood?" David considered the question. "Honestly, it's been the way people have treated us like neighbors rather than curiosities. Military families sometimes feel like they're on display in civilian communities. People don't know how to relate to us. But here, people have just accepted us as part of the community." "That's because you are part of the community," said Mr. Rodriguez. "Military service is something to be honored, not something that sets you apart." After lunch, the work resumed with renewed energy. Marcus was amazed by how much progress was being made. The electrical work in the basement was nearly complete, the plumbing repairs were finished, the deck was looking like new, and the painting was progressing rapidly. But it was the smaller interactions that really caught Marcus's attention. He noticed Tom Bradley showing David how to properly wire an outlet, sharing knowledge that would be useful for future home maintenance. He saw Bill Patterson teaching Janet how to adjust the toilet mechanism, explaining that it was an easy fix if it happened again. "These are life skills," Bill explained to Janet. "Military families move so much that you don't always have time to learn home maintenance. Now that you're settled, it's good to know how to handle these things yourself." By mid-afternoon, the transformation was remarkable. The Morrison house was beginning to look like a home that had been lovingly maintained for years, rather than a place where a family had just moved in. "This is incredible," Janet said to Marcus as they surveyed the progress. "I can't believe how much has been accomplished in one day." "And we're not done yet," Marcus replied with a smile. "We've still got tomorrow." As the day wound down, Marcus felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The work was progressing beautifully, but more importantly, genuine relationships were being formed. The Morrison family wasn't just receiving help. They were becoming integrated into the community in a way that would last long after the workdays were over. "You know what the best part of this is?" David said to Marcus as they watched the volunteers cleaning up their tools. "What's that?" "It's not just about the work. It's about the connections. We're not just getting our house fixed. We're becoming part of something bigger." Marcus nodded, understanding exactly what David meant. "That's what community is supposed to be about. And Marcus," David continued, "this is giving me ideas about how we might be able to help other military families going through the same transition we went through." "What do you mean?" "I mean, maybe what's happening here could be a model for other communities. Maybe we could help other military families find this kind of support and acceptance." Marcus felt a surge of excitement. "That's a fantastic idea. David, we should talk more about that." As the volunteers began to pack up for the day, Marcus realized that something much bigger than a simple work project was taking shape. They were creating a template for how communities could support military families, and David was already thinking about how to expand that support to others. Tomorrow would bring more work, but Marcus was beginning to understand that the real work, the work of building community and supporting those who had served, was just beginning. Sunday morning brought with it a sense of anticipation and accomplishment. Marcus arrived at the Morrison house to find that yesterday's work had indeed transformed the property. The basement electrical work was complete, the plumbing issues were resolved, the deck looked like new, and the fresh paint on the interior. Walls had brightened the entire house, but today's work would be different. Today was about the larger, more complex projects that required specialized skills and more coordination. Marcus had spent the evening before reviewing the plan and making sure all the necessary materials were available. Sarah Johnson, the landscaping business owner, arrived early with a truck full of plants, mulch, and landscaping materials. She had brought 2 employees with her, and they immediately began unloading their equipment. "Good morning, Marcus," Sarah called out. "We're ready to transform this front yard." Marcus walked over to examine the materials Sarah had brought. "This looks fantastic. What's the plan?" "We're going to plant some native Iowa plants that will look good year-round and require minimal maintenance," Sarah explained. "We'll also put in a new walkway from the driveway to the front door and create some defined planting areas." "That sounds perfect for a military family that's been used to base housing," Marcus observed. "Exactly. We want to give them a beautiful yard that won't require a lot of specialized knowledge to maintain." Mike Rodriguez, the construction company owner, arrived with his crew and a truck full of materials for the driveway work. This was the most complex project of the weekend, requiring professional expertise and specialized equipment. "Marcus," Mike said, "we're going to need to close off the driveway for most of the day. Is there somewhere the Morrison family can park their car? I've already talked to Mrs. Patterson about that. They can use her driveway." "Perfect. We'll start by cleaning out all the cracks and damaged areas. Then we'll resurface the entire driveway. By the end of the day, they'll have a driveway that looks better than new." As the day progressed, Marcus was amazed by the level of coordination and professionalism displayed by all the volunteers. These weren't just people donating their time. They were skilled professionals donating their expertise. David Morrison seemed overwhelmed by the scale of the work being done. Marcus found him standing in his front yard, watching the landscaping crew reshape his entire front yard. "David, how are you holding up?" Marcus asked. I'm speechless," David replied. "Yesterday was incredible, but this is beyond anything I could have imagined. Sarah and her crew are essentially giving us a complete landscape makeover. And Mike's crew is giving you a new driveway," Marcus added. "These are significant improvements to your property." "I know, and I keep thinking about the cost. If we had hired professionals to do all this work, it would have been thousands and thousands of dollars. Marcus nodded. But that's not what this is about. This is about community, about showing appreciation for your service, about making sure you feel welcome here. I'm starting to understand that, David said, but it's still overwhelming. I'm not used to being on the receiving end of this kind of generosity. Military families give a lot to their communities, Marcus replied. Sometimes it's good to let the community give back. As the afternoon wore on, Marcus found himself thinking about the broader implications of what was happening. This wasn't just about helping one family. It was about the community discovering its own capacity for generosity and cooper. Mrs. Patterson approached him as he was helping with some final details on the landscaping. Marcus, she said, I wanted to thank you for organizing this. Thank me? You've done as much work as anyone. That's not what I mean. I mean thank you for giving all of us the opportunity to do something meaningful. This neighborhood has been looking for a way to come together, and you've provided that opportunity. Marcus looked around at the bustling activity. I just wanted to help a military family. I didn't expect it to turn into this. That's what makes it special, Mrs. Patterson replied. You acted from the heart, and it inspired everyone else to do the same. By late afternoon, the transformation was complete. The Morrison house looked like it had been professionally maintained and landscaped. The driveway was smooth and perfect. The front yard was beautifully landscaped with native plants and a new walkway, and the overall appearance of the property had been dramatically improved. But it was the reaction of the Morrison family that really made the day special. When Janet Morrison saw the completed landscaping, she began to cry. This is beautiful, she said, her voice thick with emotion. This is the most beautiful yard we've ever had. David Morrison was equally moved. I don't know how to thank everyone, he said to the assembled volunteers. This is beyond generous. This is life-changing. Marcus felt a surge of pride and satisfaction. David, you don't need to thank us. You've already given us more than we can ever give back. What do you mean? You've given us 22 years of service to our country. You've shown us what dedication and sacrifice look like. And now you've given us the opportunity to come together as a community and do something meaningful. As the volunteers began to pack up their tools and equipment, Marcus noticed that many of them were making plans to stay in touch with the Morrison family. Phone numbers were exchanged, invitations were extended, and connections were being made that would last long after the workday was over. Tom Bradley, the retired electrician, was showing David how to maintain the new electrical work in the basement. Bill Patterson, the retired plumber, was giving Janet a basic toolkit and explaining how to handle simple maintenance issues. Sarah Johnson was providing Janet with care instructions for the new landscaping. This is the beginning of something, Mrs. Patterson said to Marcus as they watched the interactions. This family is going to be part of this community for a long time. That was the goal, Marcus replied. To make sure they felt welcome and valued. Mission accomplished, Mrs. Patterson said with a smile. But as Marcus watched David Morrison standing in his newly landscaped front yard, surrounded by neighbors who had become friends, he sensed that David was thinking about something bigger than just his own family situation. Marcus, David said, approaching him as the last of the volunteers were finishing up, I've been thinking about what you said yesterday. About this being a model for other communities. What about it? I think we need to talk more about that. I think what happened here this weekend could help a lot of other military families. Marcus felt a surge of excitement. What do you have in mind? I'm not sure yet. But I think we've discovered something important here. We've figured out how to bridge the gap between military families and civilian communities. We've created a way for people to show genuine appreciation for military service while actually helping families in practical ways. You're right, Marcus said. This has been about more than just home repairs. Exactly. And if we could figure out how to replicate this in other communities, we could help a lot of families who are going through the same transition we went through. Marcus looked around at the transformed property, at the volunteers cleaning up their tools, at the Morrison family standing together in their beautiful new yard. "David, I think you might be onto something really important." "I think so too. And Marcus, I think this is just the beginning." As Marcus walked home that evening, he couldn't shake the feeling that the weekend's work had been about more than just helping one family. It had been about discovering the power of community, about finding ways to honor service and sacrifice, and about creating connections that would last long after the work was done. But more than that, he sensed that David Morrison was right. This was just the beginning of something much bigger. The weeks following the community workdays settled into a comfortable rhythm. The Morrison family had integrated seamlessly into the neighborhood, and Marcus was pleased to see that the relationships formed during the project were continuing to develop. David had become a regular walking partner with Mr. Rodriguez. Janet had joined Mrs. Patterson's book club, and the Morrison children had formed lasting friendships with other kids in the neighborhood. But it was on a Thursday evening in late October that Marcus learned something about David Morrison that changed his understanding of the man entirely. Marcus was working in his garage when David appeared at the door, carrying 2 bottles of beer and wearing an expression that suggested he had something important to discuss. "Marcus, do you have a few minutes?" David asked. "Of course. Come on in." David handed Marcus one of the beers and settled into an old lawn chair that Marcus kept in the garage. "I wanted to talk to you about something I haven't told many people." Marcus could hear the seriousness in David's voice. "What's on your mind?" David was quiet for a moment, organizing his thoughts. "You know how I mentioned that my last deployment was difficult? That I lost a Marine named Jimmy Rodriguez? I remember. Well, there's more to that story. Something that makes what this community has done for my family even more meaningful." Marcus waited, sensing that David needed to tell this story in his own way. "After Jimmy was killed, I had to write a letter to his family. It's one of the hardest things a military commander has to do. You have to explain to parents, to a fiancé, to siblings, that their loved one died serving his country. You have to find words that somehow make sense of senseless loss." David took a long drink of his beer. "I wrote that letter, Marcus. I told Jimmy's family about his service, about his character, about how much he meant to his fellow Marines. I told them he died a hero. That must have been incredibly difficult." "It was. But that's not the part I haven't told you." David looked directly at Marcus. "After I sent that letter, I got a response from Jimmy's family. They wrote back to thank me for my words, but they also told me something that I'll never forget." Marcus felt a sense of anticipation building. "They told me that Jimmy had written to them about me, about how I had helped his family move when they were stationed at Camp Pendleton. Jimmy's parents had gotten divorced, and his mother was struggling financially. I helped her move to a smaller apartment, spent a Saturday loading and unloading boxes just like we did here." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. David ... Jimmy wrote to his mother that his commanding officer was the kind of man who would take time out of his personal life to help a struggling family. He said it made him proud to serve under my command. David's voice was becoming thick with emotion. He said that if something ever happened to him, he hoped someone would do the same thing for his commanding officer's family. The garage fell silent except for the sound of David's breathing and the distant hum of neighborhood activity. "Marcus, when I saw this community come together to help my family, when I saw you organizing dozens of volunteers to work on our house, when I saw people donating their time and materials and expertise, I kept thinking about Jimmy's letter. I kept thinking that maybe this was Jimmy's way of making good on his wish." Marcus felt overwhelmed by the weight of what David was telling him. "David, I had no idea. I know you didn't. That's what makes it so meaningful. You didn't help us because you knew about Jimmy. You helped us because it was the right thing to do. Just like I helped Jimmy's mother because it was the right thing to do. David stood up and walked to the garage door, looking out at the neighborhood. Do you know what this means to me, Marcus? It means that maybe Jimmy's death wasn't meaningless. Maybe there's a connection between acts of kindness, between service, between people taking care of each other. Marcus joined David at the garage door. There's a connection. It's called community. It's called compassion. It's called honoring those who serve. I've been thinking about that a lot lately. About how one act of kindness can ripple out in ways we never expect. I helped Jimmy's mother move, which meant something to Jimmy, which led to a letter that his family treasured, which gives meaning to what happened here. And what happened here inspired other people to think about how they can serve their community, Marcus added. Mrs. Patterson has been talking about organizing regular volunteer projects. The Johnsons have started a neighborhood support network. Tom Bradley has offered to help other veterans with home repair projects. David nodded. That's exactly what I mean. One act of kindness creates another, which creates another, which creates another. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the neighborhood settle into evening routines. Marcus, there's something else I want to tell you. What's that? I've been thinking about my sense of mission, about what I'm supposed to be doing with my life now that I'm out of the military. I think I've figured it out. What do you mean? I think my mission now is to create the kind of community where people take care of each other, where military families feel valued and supported, where acts of kindness inspire more acts of kindness. Marcus felt a surge of understanding. And you think this neighborhood, this community, is the place to do that? I think this neighborhood has already shown me what's possible. Now I want to help make it happen for other families, other veterans, other communities. How? David smiled. I've been talking to people at the Veterans Office about creating a program that connects military families with community volunteers. Something that would replicate what happened here in other neighborhoods. That's a fantastic idea. I want to call it the Jimmy Rodriguez Community Connection Project. I want to honor his memory by creating opportunities for communities to support military families. Marcus felt a deep sense of satisfaction. David, I think Jimmy would be proud. I hope so. I also hope that other communities will discover what we've discovered here, that supporting military families isn't just good for the families, it's good for the entire community. As they finished their beers, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. What had started as a simple gesture of neighborly kindness had evolved into something much larger, a model for community engagement, a way to honor military service, and a testament to the power of human connection. David, can I ask you something? Sure. What do you think Jimmy would think about what happened here? David considered the question. I think he would say that this is what America is supposed to look like. People from different backgrounds, different experiences, different walks of life, coming together to take care of each other. I think he'd be right. And I think he'd say that this is why he served. Not for abstract principles, but for the possibility that communities like this one could exist. Marcus nodded, understanding the profound truth in David's words. So what happens next? Next, we keep building. We keep creating connections. We keep showing other communities what's possible. And we keep honoring Jimmy's memory. Exactly. We keep honoring Jimmy's memory by making sure his wish that someone would take care of his commanding officer's family continues to inspire people to take care of each other. As David prepared to leave, he turned back to Marcus. Thank you, Marcus, not just for organizing the workdays, but for listening to this story, for understanding what it means. Thank you for sharing it with me. It changes everything. What do you mean? I mean, now I understand that what we did here wasn't just about helping one family. It was about honoring the memory of a young Marine who believed in the power of community. It was about proving that his faith in people was justified. David smiled. That's exactly right. And Marcus? Yes? I think we're just getting started. Word of the Morrison family work days had spread beyond the immediate neighborhood, but it was the story of Jimmy Rodriguez that truly catalyzed something extraordinary. David had shared this story with his colleagues at the Veterans Office, and they had been so moved by the connection between Jimmy's memory and the community response that they had written an article for the local veterans newsletter. Marcus first learned about the broader impact when he received a phone call on a Saturday morning in early November. "Is this Marcus Thompson?" the caller asked. "Yes, this is Marcus. My name is Patricia Williams. I'm a reporter with the Cedar Rapids Gazette. I'd like to talk to you about the Morrison Family Project." Marcus was surprised. "How did you hear about it?" "Through the Veterans Office newsletter. They published a story about the community work days and the connection to Lance Corporal Jimmy Rodriguez. It's a remarkable story, and I think our readers would be interested in hearing about it." "I'm not sure I'm the right person to talk to about this," Marcus said. "This was a community effort, not something I did alone." "That's exactly why I want to talk to you. I'm interested in how communities can come together to support military families. This seems like a model that other communities could follow." Marcus agreed to meet with the reporter, but he insisted that David Morrison be included in the conversation. "This is really his story," Marcus explained. "I was just the person who got the ball rolling." The interview took place at the Morrison house on a crisp November afternoon. Patricia Williams was a thoughtful reporter who clearly understood the significance of what had happened. "Marcus, can you tell me how this all started?" she asked. Marcus recounted the story of the Morrison family's move, his decision to help with the boxes, and the gradual development of the community work days. "What motivated you to do more than just help with the move?" Patricia asked. "I think it was seeing how much the family had given in service to our country, and realizing that the transition to civilian life was more challenging than I had understood. I wanted to make sure they felt welcome and valued in their new community." Patricia turned to David. "And David, what was your reaction when Marcus proposed the community work days?" David smiled. "Honestly, I was reluctant at first. Military families are used to being self-sufficient. But Marcus helped me understand that accepting community support was part of integrating into civilian life." "Can you tell me about the connection to Lance Corporal Jimmy Rodriguez?" David's expression became more serious as he recounted the story of Jimmy's death, the letter to his family, and the discovery of Jimmy's own letter about Marcus's act of kindness. "It felt like Jimmy's spirit was somehow involved in bringing this community together," David said. "Like his wish that someone would take care of his commanding officer's family was being fulfilled in a way that honored his memory." Patricia was clearly moved by the story. "And now you're working to create a program that would replicate this model in other communities?" "That's right. We're calling it the Jimmy Rodriguez Community Connection Project. The idea is to create a framework that other communities can use to support military families." "How would that work?" David explained the concept. "We would train community volunteers to identify military families who could benefit from support, organize workdays similar to what happened here, and create ongoing connections between military families and their civilian neighbors." "And the response has been positive?" "Incredible," David said. "We've had inquiries from veterans organizations, community groups, and individual volunteers from all over Iowa and beyond." Patricia turned back to Marcus. "What do you think is the key to making this kind of community effort successful?" Marcus had been thinking about this question. "I think it's about approaching it with the right attitude. This isn't charity, it's community building. It's about recognizing that military families have something valuable to offer civilian communities, and that civilian communities have something valuable to offer military families." "What do you mean?" Military families bring discipline, service, orientation, and a global perspective. They've often lived in diverse communities and dealt with challenging situations. Civilian communities bring stability, local knowledge, and the kind of deep roots that military families often haven't had the opportunity to develop. So it's mutually beneficial? Exactly. Military families get practical support and community connection. Civilian communities get the opportunity to learn from people who have served something bigger than themselves. Patricia spent the rest of the afternoon interviewing other volunteers from the workdays. She spoke with Mrs. Patterson about the neighborhood response, with Tom Bradley about the technical aspects of the work, and with Sarah Johnson about the business community's involvement. "What I'm hearing," Patricia said as she prepared to leave, "is that this project brought out the best in everyone involved." "That's exactly right," Marcus replied. "It gave everyone a chance to serve something bigger than themselves." The article appeared in the Cedar Rapids Gazette the following Sunday, with the headline, "One Good Turn: How a Simple Act of Kindness Honored a Fallen Marine and Transformed a Community." The article was comprehensive, telling the story of the Morrison family's transition to civilian life, the community workdays, and the connection to Jimmy Rodriguez. But it was the sidebar that accompanied the article that really caught Marcus's attention. It was titled, "How to Organize a Community Support Project for Military Families," and included a step-by-step guide based on the Morrison family experience. The response to the article was immediate and overwhelming. Marcus received dozens of phone calls from people wanting to organize similar projects in their communities. The Veterans Office was flooded with inquiries about the Jimmy Rodriguez Community Connection Project. "Marcus," David called him on the Tuesday after the article appeared, "I think we've started something bigger than we ever imagined." "What do you mean?" "I mean, I've gotten calls from veterans organizations in 5 different states. They all want to know how to implement the Community Connection Project in their areas." Marcus felt a surge of excitement mixed with responsibility. Are we ready for that kind of expansion? I think we have to be. This isn't just about one family anymore. It's about creating a national model for community support of military families. That's a big responsibility, it is. But I keep thinking about Jimmy, about his belief that people would take care of each other. If we can create a framework that makes that happen for hundreds of military families, then his death will have contributed to something truly meaningful. Marcus understood the weight of what David was saying. So what do we do next? Next, we start building the infrastructure to support communities that want to implement this model. We create training materials, establish partnerships with veterans organizations, and develop a network of communities committed to supporting military families. That sounds like a full-time job, David laughed. It might become one. But Marcus, I can't think of a better way to honor Jimmy's memory and serve my community. Over the following weeks, the momentum continued to build. The article was picked up by other newspapers across the Midwest, and the story began to spread through social media. Marcus found himself fielding calls from reporters, community organizers, and veterans advocates from across the country. "This is incredible," Marcus said to David during one of their regular evening conversations. "I never imagined that helping you move some boxes would lead to this." "That's the power of community," David replied. "One act of kindness inspires another, which inspires another, which inspires another. Pretty soon, you have a movement. Is that what this is?" "A movement?" David considered the question. "I think it might be. I think we've tapped into something that communities across the country have been waiting for, a way to meaningfully support military families while building stronger communities. And it all started with Jimmy Rodriguez's belief that people would take care of each other." Exactly. Jimmy's faith in humanity is being proven right, one community at a time. As Marcus reflected on the journey from that first evening when he helped the Morrison family move to the current moment, when Communities across the country were inquiring about the Jimmy Rodriguez Community Connection Project. He was amazed by the power of simple human kindness to create change, but he also understood that this was just the beginning. The real work of building sustainable programs, training volunteers, and creating lasting connections between military families and their civilian neighbors was still ahead of them. "David," Marcus said, "I think Jimmy would be proud of what we've started." "I hope so. But more than that, I think he'd want us to keep going, to make sure that his wish that people would take care of each other becomes a reality for as many families as possible. Then that's what we'll do. That's what we'll do." The weeks following the Cedar Rapids Gazette article brought an avalanche of interest that neither Marcus nor David had anticipated. What had started as a simple act of neighborly kindness had caught the attention of veterans organizations, community groups, and military families across the country. Marcus was at his construction job when he received a call that would change everything. "Marcus Thompson?" the caller said in a crisp, professional voice. "Yes, this is Marcus. This is Colonel Sarah Mitchell from the Marine Corps' Community Services Division. I'm calling about the Jimmy Rodriguez Community Connection Project." Marcus nearly dropped his phone. "I'm sorry, did you say Colonel?" "That's right. I read the article about your community's support for the Morrison family, and I wanted to discuss the possibility of partnering with the Marine Corps to expand this program nationally." Marcus felt overwhelmed. "Colonel, I think you need to talk to David Morrison. He's the one who's been developing the formal program." "I plan to speak with Mr. Morrison as well, but I wanted to talk to you first. You're the community organizer who made this happen. We're interested in understanding how civilian communities can be engaged in supporting military families. I'm not sure I'm qualified to have this conversation with a Marine Corps colonel," Marcus said honestly. Colonel Mitchell laughed. "Mr. Thompson, you've organized one of the most successful community support projects for military families that I've seen in my 25 years of service. I think you're more qualified than you realize." The conversation that followed was one of the most surreal experiences of Marcus's life. Colonel Mitchell explained that the Marine Corps was looking for innovative ways to support military families during the transition to civilian life. The traditional approach focused on individual services and benefits, but the Morrison Family Project demonstrated the power of community-based support. "What we're seeing," Colonel Mitchell explained, "is that military families often struggle with the social aspects of civilian transition. They know how to access benefits and services, but they don't always know how to integrate into civilian communities. Your project addresses that gap." "How so?" "By creating meaningful connections between military families and their civilian neighbors. By providing practical support in a way that builds relationships rather than just solving problems. By honoring military service while helping families move forward." Marcus found himself thinking about the past few months from this new perspective. "Colonel, I have to say, I never thought of it in those terms. We were just trying to help a neighbor." "That's exactly what makes it so powerful. It's authentic community engagement, not a program imposed from above." Colonel Mitchell explained that the Marine Corps wanted to pilot the Community Connection Project in 10 communities across the country. They would provide funding, training materials, and organizational support, but the projects would be community-led. "We want to replicate what happened in Cedar Rapids," she said. "But we want to do it in a way that allows each community to adapt the model to their local context. What would you need from us?" "We'd like David Morrison to serve as a national coordinator for the project, and we'd like you to help develop the community engagement training materials." Marcus felt a surge of excitement and nervousness. "Colonel, I work construction. I don't know anything about developing training materials. You know how to organize a community. You know how to motivate volunteers. You know how to create meaningful connections between people. Those are exactly the skills we need." The call ended with Colonel Mitchell arranging to visit Cedar Rapids the following week to meet with Marcus, David, and the other volunteers who had been part of the original project. That evening, Marcus called David to share the news. "David, you're not going to believe this. I just got a call from a Marine Corps colonel about the Community Connection Project." "What did she want?" "She wants to partner with the Marine Corps to expand the program nationally. She wants you to be the national coordinator." David was quiet for a moment. "Marcus, that's incredible, but it's also overwhelming. Are we ready for that kind of responsibility? I don't know. But I keep thinking about Jimmy Rodriguez, about his belief that people would take care of each other. If we can create a framework that makes that happen for hundreds of military families across the country, isn't that exactly what he would have wanted?" "You're right. And Marcus, this could be the mission I've been looking for. The way to continue serving, just in a different capacity." Colonel Mitchell's visit the following week was a revelation. She spent 2 days in Cedar Rapids, meeting with all the volunteers who had participated in the Morrison Family Project, touring the neighborhood and observing the ongoing relationships that had developed. "What I'm seeing here," she told the assembled group, "is a model for how military-civilian relationships should work. You've created authentic connections based on mutual respect and shared values." Mrs. Patterson raised her hand. "Colonel, what makes this different from other support programs?" "Most support programs are service delivery focused. They're about providing specific assistance to meet specific needs. This is relationship focused. It's about integrating military families into communities in a way that benefits everyone involved." Tom Bradley, the retired electrician, spoke up. "So you're saying this isn't just about helping military families?" "That's exactly right. This is about strengthening communities by bringing together people with different experiences and perspectives. Military families bring discipline, service orientation, and global perspective. Civilian communities bring local knowledge, stability, and deep roots." Colonel Mitchell spent considerable time with Marcus, discussing the community organizing aspects of the project. "Marcus, what do you think is the most important factor in making this kind of project successful?" Marcus had been thinking about this question. "I think it's about approaching it with the right attitude. It can't be about charity or pity. It has to be about genuine community building." "What do you mean?" "I mean, people have to understand that military families have something valuable to offer, not just needs to be met. The relationship has to be reciprocal. And how do you create that understanding?" "By telling stories. By helping people understand what military service means, what military families have experienced, what they bring to civilian communities. By making it personal rather than abstract." Colonel Mitchell nodded. "That's exactly the kind of thinking we need to build into the training materials." The meeting concluded with an agreement to move forward with the national pilot program. David would take a leave of absence from his job with the county to serve as national coordinator. Marcus would work part-time developing community engagement materials while continuing his construction work. "This is going to change our lives," David said to Marcus as they walked Colonel Mitchell to her car. "It's going to change a lot of lives," Marcus replied. "That's the point. Do you think we're ready for this?" Marcus looked around the neighborhood, seeing the evidence of the community connections that had developed over the past few months. "I think we're as ready as we can be. And I think Jimmy Rodriguez would be proud." "I think so too. And Marcus?" "Yeah. I think this is just the beginning of something amazing." As they watched Colonel Mitchell's car disappear down Elm Street, Marcus felt a profound sense of both accomplishment and anticipation. What had started with helping a neighbor move boxes was about to become a national program that could help thousands of military families across the country. But more than that, it was about proving that Jimmy Rodriguez's faith in humanity, his belief that people would take care of each other, was not misplaced. It was about showing that one act of kindness could indeed change the world, one community at a time. It was a Monday evening in early December when Marcus received the phone call that would set in motion the most extraordinary day of his life. He was having dinner with his parents, sharing updates about the Jimmy Rodriguez Community Connection project when his phone rang. Marcus Thompson? The voice was formal, military. Double quotes. Yes, this is Marcus. This is Master Sergeant Rodriguez from the 2nd Marine Division. I'm calling about tomorrow. Marcus felt confused. Tomorrow? I'm sorry, I don't understand. Sir, tomorrow is the day we honor your community and the memory of Lance Corporal Jimmy Rodriguez. We wanted to make sure you and the Morrison family would be available. Marcus's heart began to race. Master Sergeant, I think there might be some confusion. We don't have anything scheduled for tomorrow. Sir, with respect, you do now. We'll be there at 0800 hours. Please make sure Gunnery Sergeant Morrison and his family are present, along with the key volunteers from your community project. The line went dead before Marcus could ask any more questions. He stared at his phone, trying to process what had just happened. Marcus, who was that? His mother asked. I think it was the Marines. They're coming tomorrow to honor the community project. His father looked up from his meal. Coming how? I don't know. He didn't give me any details. Marcus immediately called David Morrison. David, I just got the strangest call from a Marine Master Sergeant. He said they're coming tomorrow to honor the community and Jimmy Rodriguez's memory. What do you mean coming? I don't know. He said to make sure you and your family are available, along with the key volunteers. David, I think something big is about to happen. David was quiet for a moment. Marcus, I need to tell you something. I've been getting calls too. From Marines I served with, from people at Jimmy's old unit. They've all been asking about our address, about the community project. What did you tell them? I told them about what happened here, about how the community came together, about the connection to Jimmy's memory. But I didn't think. I never expected them to actually show up. Maybe we should call some of the other volunteers, let them know something might be happening. Good idea. I'll call Mrs. Patterson and Tom Bradley. You call the others. Marcus spent the next hour on the phone, trying to reach the volunteers who had been part of the original project. The conversations were all similar. Nobody knew exactly what was planned, but everyone agreed to be available the next morning. Mrs. Patterson was particularly excited. Marcus, I have a feeling this is going to be something special. I'm going to make sure I have plenty of coffee and breakfast items prepared. Mrs. Patterson, we don't even know how many people are coming. Then I'll prepare for an army, she said with a laugh. Or in this case, I suppose, a Marine Corps. That night, Marcus lay awake thinking about the journey that had brought them to this point. It had been just over 3 months since he first helped the Morrison family move their boxes. 3 months since he learned about David's military service and the challenges of transitioning to civilian life. 3 months since the community workdays that had transformed not just the Morrison house, but the entire neighborhood. And now, somehow that simple act of kindness had caught the attention of the United States Marine Corps. The next morning, Marcus woke up before his alarm. He had barely slept, his mind racing with possibilities about what the day might bring. He dressed carefully, choosing his best jeans and a button-down shirt. If the Marines were coming to honor the community, he wanted to look presentable. He arrived at the Morrison house at 7:30 a.m. to find David already outside, wearing his dress shirt and looking nervous. Any idea what we're in for? Marcus asked. None at all. But I have a feeling it's going to be something we'll never forget. Mrs. Patterson appeared from her house, carrying a large tray of coffee and pastries. Boys, I've been up since 5 a.m. getting ready. I don't know what's going to happen, but I want to make sure our guests are properly welcomed. Over the next few minutes, other volunteers began to arrive. Tom Bradley came with his wife, both dressed in their Sunday best. The Johnson family arrived with their children, who seemed excited by the sense of anticipation in the air. Mr. Rodriguez brought his camera, saying he had a feeling they were going to want to document whatever was about to happen. "Look," said Sarah Johnson, pointing down the street out in the distance. Marcus could see movement. Vehicles were approaching, not just one or two, but what looked like a convoy. Military vehicles moving in formation down their quiet residential street. "My God," David whispered. "They're really here." As the vehicles got closer, Marcus could see that they were filled with Marines in dress uniform. The convoy seemed to stretch for blocks with more vehicles than Marcus could count. "David," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper, "what did you tell them about Jimmy Rodriguez?" "I told them the truth. About how he died, about his letter, about how this community honored his memory by taking care of his family, about how his faith in people was proven right. And they came all this way for that?" David's eyes were filled with tears. "Marcus, I think they came all this way because Jimmy Rodriguez represents every young Marine who believed in the goodness of people. And you, our community, you proved that his faith was justified." As the first vehicle pulled up to the Morrison house, Marcus realized that this wasn't just about honoring one community's act of kindness. This was about something much bigger. This was about the bond between those who serve and those who support them. This was about proving that the values our military fights for, community, compassion, taking care of each other, are alive and well in American neighborhoods. This was about showing that Jimmy Rodriguez's belief in the goodness of people was not naive or misplaced. It was about demonstrating that one act of kindness, inspired by one young Marine's faith in humanity, could indeed change the world. As the Marines began to emerge from their vehicles, Marcus took a deep breath. Whatever was about to happen, he knew it would be a moment that would stay with him for the rest of his life. What happened next was something that Marcus would remember for the rest of his life, frame by frame, like a movie playing in slow motion. The Bayandang. Marines emerged from their vehicles with military precision, but there was something different about their bearing. These weren't soldiers reporting for duty. These were men and women who had come to pay tribute, to honor, to show gratitude. Marcus watched in amazement as more than 100 Marines in dress blue uniforms formed perfect lines along both sides of Elm Street. They stretched as far as he could see in both directions, standing at attention, their white caps gleaming in the morning sun. "My God," Mrs. Patterson whispered, her hand over her heart. "I've never seen anything so beautiful." A Marine colonel stepped forward and approached. "David Morrison." "Gunnery Sergeant Morrison, I'm Colonel James Patterson, commanding officer of the 2nd Marine Division. We're here to honor Lance Corporal Jimmy Rodriguez and to thank this community for proving that his faith in humanity was justified." David stood straighter, his military bearing returning instinctively. "Colonel, this is overwhelming. I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything, Gunnery Sergeant. Your actions and the actions of this community speak louder than any words." The colonel turned to address the assembled crowd, which now included not just the original volunteers, but neighbors from throughout the area who had come out to witness this extraordinary scene. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are here today because of a story that has spread throughout the Marine Corps, a story about Lance Corporal Jimmy Rodriguez, who died believing that Americans would take care of each other. A story about Gunnery Sergeant Morrison, who honored that belief by helping a struggling family. And a story about this community, which proved that Jimmy's faith was not misplaced." The colonel's voice carried across the neighborhood, strong and clear. "When we heard about what happened here, about how this community came together to support the Morrison family, we knew we had to respond. Because this is what we fight for. This is what Jimmy Rodriguez died for. Not for abstract ideals, but for the reality of American communities taking care of each other." Marcus felt tears welling up in his eyes as he looked around at his neighbors. at the volunteers who had become friends, at the Morrison family who had become so much more than just neighbors. But we're not just here to honor the past, the Colonel continued. We're here to celebrate the future. The Jimmy Rodriguez Community Connection Project, which grew out of what happened on this street, is now being implemented in communities across the country. Because of what you started here, hundreds of military families will find the same welcome, the same support, the same sense of belonging that the Morrison family found. The Colonel turned to Marcus. "Mr. Thompson, would you step forward, please?" Marcus felt frozen, but David gently pushed him forward. "Go on, Marcus. This is your moment." Marcus walked toward the Colonel, feeling the eyes of more than 100 Marines upon him. "Sir, I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do." The Colonel smiled. "You're supposed to accept the gratitude of every Marine who has ever served, and every Marine who ever will serve. Because you proved that the America we fight for is real." The Colonel reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded American flag. This flag flew over Marine Corps' headquarters in honor of Lance Corporal Jimmy Rodriguez, and in recognition of this community's service to military families, we present it to you not as an individual, but as a representative of every person who participated in supporting the Morrison family. As Marcus accepted the flag, he felt the weight of not just the fabric, but of everything it represented. The sacrifices of young Marines like Jimmy Rodriguez, the service of veterans like David Morrison, the power of communities to come together and take care of each other. And now, the Colonel said, we would like to honor Lance Corporal Rodriguez in the way he would have wanted, by celebrating the community that proved his faith was justified. The Marines began to sing the Marine Corps' hymn, their voices rising in perfect harmony across the quiet neighborhood. As they sang, Marcus looked around at the faces of his neighbors, seeing tears in their eyes, seeing pride in their expressions, seeing the understanding that they had been part of something truly special. When the hymn ended, the Colonel spoke once more. "Ladies and gentlemen, you have shown us what America looks like at its best. You have honored the memory of a fallen Marine by living the values he died for. You have proven that one act of kindness can change the world." As the ceremony concluded and the Marines began to form up for departure, many of them took time to speak personally with the volunteers, thanking them for their service to the Morrison family and to the military community. Master Sergeant Rodriguez, the Marine who had called Marcus the night before, approached him as the crowd began to disperse. "Mr. Thompson, I wanted you to know that Lance Corporal Rodriguez was my nephew. When I heard about what happened here, about how his memory inspired this community to come together, I knew we had to do something to honor both him and all of you." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. "Your nephew?" "Yes, sir. And I want you to know that what you've done here, what this community has done, it's given meaning to his death in a way that nothing else could. You've proven that he didn't die in vain." As the Marines departed and the neighborhood slowly returned to normal, Marcus stood in the Morrisons' front yard with David, both of them still processing what had just happened. "David," Marcus said finally, "do you think Jimmy would be proud?" David smiled, tears still in his eyes. "I think Jimmy would say that this is exactly what he knew would happen. That Americans would take care of each other. That one act of kindness would inspire another, and another, and another. And now we keep going. We keep building the program. We keep proving that Jimmy's faith in humanity was justified. We keep showing that America is a place where people take care of each other." Marcus looked around at his neighborhood, at Mrs. Patterson cleaning up the breakfast dishes, at the Johnson children playing in their yard, at Mr. Rodriguez photographing the flag that now flew from the Morrisons' front porch. This was his community, his family, his home, and it all started with helping a neighbor move some boxes. 6 months later, the Jimmy Rodriguez Community Connection Project was active in 50 communities across the United States. Thousands of military families had been welcomed into their new communities by neighbors who understood that service deserves recognition, that sacrifice deserves support, and that every family deserves to feel like they belong. Marcus still worked construction, but now he also traveled to communities across the country, teaching them how to organize support projects for military families. David had become the national coordinator for the program, working with veterans organizations and community groups to spread the model that had started on Elm Street and in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, on a quiet street where neighbors still waved to each other from their front porches. There stands a house where a military family learned that America is indeed a place where people take care of each other, where the memory of Lance Corporal Jimmy Rodriguez lives on in every act of kindness, every gesture of support, every moment when communities come together to prove that one person's faith in humanity can change the world. Because sometimes, the smallest acts of kindness create the biggest waves. And sometimes, helping a neighbor move some boxes is just the beginning of something extraordinary. If you enjoyed this story, please like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us bring more inspiring stories and meaningful content. And most importantly, stay hopeful and keep moving forward, because brighter days are ahead. Thanks again for watching, and we look forward to sharing more stories with you soon. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.